Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I'm so honored to be joined by one of our distinguished corporate communication graduates, Dylan Bowman. Dylan, welcome back to the podcast. It's been a little while since we've had you on.
It's great to be back.
Well, it's absolutely our pleasure. The reason that we're having you on our first podcast of the term is that you're going to be doing a couple of things here. First of all, we're here to promote the upcoming CPC Film Series on Friday, July 28th at 6 o'clock in the Capitol Blue Cross Theater. Now, here's what's very unique about this. First of all, you will be the first person ever to screen their own film, which I think is so unique. Now, what has come in the film series before? I will say that I did screen my own documentary as a piece before, but my documentary is only 10 minutes. So this is like sort of a double feature, and we're going to talk a little bit about how unique this is, but I give you so much credit for this feature film that you are going to be presenting, and that's what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about your history. I know we've had you on before, and we've talked about this to a certain extent, but this is your opportunity to really share with us how you got involved in making your own films and just a brief preview about what you might be talking about.
Sure.
Well, let's start back at the beginning. So, Dylan, you are and have been the owner of Fellowship Studios. So not only are you an award-winning photographer, you won the statewide award for Best Sports Photo from the Pennsylvania News Media Association, which is really an unbelievable accomplishment and just goes to speak about the quality of your photography. But you have been making films since you were a kid, correct?
Yes. So in terms of photography, that's pretty much where I got my start. I was always huge into art. Got that from my mom and my dad because they're both graphic designers. And that art and love of art kind of was passed down from them. I started drawing and writing at a very young age. I would draw books and have my mom write down what I wanted it to say before I could even spell words and such. But that kind of spread eventually into photography, which my dad in particular introduced me to at a very young age. I think around the age of 9 is when I started really getting into photography. And then that spawned into writing books, comic books especially, and I would do Lego stop motions, and that kind of, in a way, spawned into the filmmaking aspects. That's kind of linked in a way. It's kind of the parallel, in my mind, between photo and video, because you're basically making a video with a bunch of photos. That spawned into the stop motion phase of my life.
But you also, when you were younger too, you had a trilogy that came out when you were younger, right? Let's talk a little bit about that.
So when I was in Boy Scouts, I think I was 13 or 14 when this started. There was a game that went on within the troops and Cub Scout packs long before I was even a part of Boy Scouts. And when I joined up, we were told, me and my friends who joined up were told about this game, which basically was a bunch of kids out in the woods fighting with swords that were sticks. And it was just, boys being boys. But we made it into like this actual storyline that we continually played upon. And we were generals and commanders, and we would lead other kids through the woods doing this. Throughout the years, we ended up doing this, went from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts. And in my first and a half year of being in Boy Scouts, we still were doing this a little bit, and it was kind of dying down, but I would always be taking videos of everything, as I've said on this podcast before, just random stuff with friends. And at one point, I thought to myself, what if I made like an actual movie, like linked these little videos together to make like a story like we're always doing anyway, and then we could watch it and add sound effects and all this cool stuff. And everyone was into the idea, but I don't think anyone, even myself, knew like what I was getting into. And they thought it would just be like, oh, a couple little videos spliced together. And that was about it. Maybe a couple explosion sound effects. And it kind of became this thing where I was getting deeper and deeper into the editing process eventually, and the storyline ended up becoming a half-hour film, 25 minutes, I think, that everyone, when I showed it, was super impressed. And I wasn't expecting the feedback I got. So eventually, long story short, they ended up demanding a year later that I continue the series and make a trilogy out of this. And that's where the filmmaking really started for me.
When you think about your background with film and really the interesting way that you got involved with this. What was it about? Obviously, you've been a very very creative person your whole life,
Right.
so it makes sense that this is sort of what it morphed into. But back then, when you were just a teenager, like how did you know? And certainly we did not have anywhere near the information that we have available now. How did you know how to use this software? Or even like, I mean, what kind of cameras were you using? I mean, certainly cell phone cameras weren't a thing back then. I mean, did you just have an old school like analog recorder? Like, tell me what kind of equipment you were working
It is
on.
really crazy in my mind how far it's been like 10 years, and we have cameras that are like 8K on your phone, so anyone can do this kind of stuff themselves, and it looks really professional. When I started, I had the little Kodak cameras that could fit like in the palm of my hand. And I think I might even still have my first one. It was green, and I used it till it didn't work anymore and wouldn't even open the lens. But that's where I started with camera. In terms of the editing software, I actually had no idea what I was doing. So when I filmed the movie, I filmed all of it without even looking into editing software. Came into post-production and was like, okay, I came to my dad because he's into graphic design, thought maybe he has a little know-how in the computer world of like what people use in that. And he said, sorry, like, I don't know what people use. Look into, like, a couple of these things. And it was, like, Windows Movie Maker. Tried looking into that because I attempted to use it for stop motion in the past, and it was an absolute nightmare. Did
Windows
not work.
Movie Maker's terrible.
It did not work at all. And I was really frustrated, 13, 14-year-old kid trying my best to work this out with all the work that had already been put in. With friends, and eventually stumbled across Adobe Premiere Pro through the Adobe suite. It cost money, but thankfully I was able to get an in through my dad's company having a subscription to that,
Right.
For other like Photoshop and whatnot. And I was able to use that and teach myself, since no one else around me really knew. I taught myself throughout my entire teen life how to use Adobe Premiere Pro.
I would almost say that just with my experience with video editing, like that's a huge task in and of itself. However, I would say maybe 10 years ago it was a lot more stripped down than it is today.
Oh, yeah. They're always updating stuff.
Just from the fact that you were able to get in sort of on the ground floor of Premiere Pro, which I would argue about 10 years ago is basically when it was being introduced for the most part. Now you're able to be an expert in this and really, really use it to the extent
I'm
that
still
it
learning,
is.
which is the crazy thing.
There's so many features in Premiere Pro that I don't think it's possible for you to know every single thing. It's a lot of just knowing in your mind what you're trying to do and how to verbalize that. That's the way I was introduced to Premiere Pro.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, okay, I want to figure out how to make a rolling credits with a black background, white text. You just type it in, and most of the time there's going to be tutorials. But I don't want to get bogged down here. So what was the first? So like I'm right now on your Fellowship Studios site. Are any of these classic trilogy videos anywhere that we can find? Because I don't see them on here.
Yes. So if you go to it's Boy Scout Troop 1165. That is the unofficial YouTube channel that I put up with all of our the trilogy, as well as a series of sequel trailers that never came to be movies, just because of like we were getting older, no one was as interested anymore. We were getting to be like Eagle Scout age. We wanted to progress in that vicinity. But there's the trailers for all of those are on there, as well as a bunch of goofy videos that we made just for fun. But yeah, that was where those are. Just because Fellowship Studios, it kind of started to become more of a professional thing. And I didn't want potential employer to see those as like, hey, what's something this kid has made? And they go to my first one.
But it just shows. Obviously, they can tell that it was from when you were a kid. I mean, if anything, I think that's really cool. I think that it would be. I think now that you're 10 years down the road, I think that as you look back, like you can see where you got your inspiration for a lot of things, and even where you sort of cut your teeth on getting into video editing. Well, I want to kind of switch gears here. And I want to talk about what some of your influences are and who some of your influences are. I know that you're a big film buff. You presented 1917 at the CPC Film Series last year. I'm just curious, like, tell me a little bit more about who some of the filmmakers are that you admire and maybe even inspire you or somehow impact the work that you're doing now.
Okay, yeah, so some of the biggest ones, I would say, especially growing up, were George Lucas, Steven Spielberg. They were huge, did most of the movies I loved as a kid, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, of course. And then More recently, one of the biggest ones that I've come to respect a lot is Christopher Nolan. He's probably my favorite director now just because of how in-depth his stories are and how thought out they are. I have yet to see a movie of his that I don't like.
I am very excited for Oppenheimer.
Yes, I am as well.
As
2 weeks.
Well, as we record this, it'll be coming out later, or as we release this, it'll be coming out later this week. But I'm fingers crossed we'll be there opening night, so long as it doesn't sell out before I make my plans. So let me ask you this. I guess the easiest way to ask this is, do you think that your style is influenced by these people? And in what way, if you would say that it is?
Oh, absolutely. I would say, especially more recently when things like Vintage, A War With Myself, and even Merciless and those have come out for Fellowship Studios, most of those kind of things have been influenced by directors like Christopher Nolan, where it's like thinking about, you can't just watch surface level and be like, oh, that was a fun movie. You usually have to either go back another time and watch it to even understand what's going on, or it makes you think about it after you watch it and you're like, wow, that was really deep, that was really entertaining, and that kind of stuff stuck with me. And it's like, those are the kind of movies that make an impact, I think, in the most way, because people remember things like Star Wars because of how jaw-dropping it is, how it influenced their childhood, and the nostalgia, the epic grandeur of that. But for something like The Dark Knight or Inception, those movies, I even still think about them because of just how deep they are. The stories are really in-depth.
I thought, especially when Nolan's last film, Tenet, came out, I did actually a paper for one of my classes about the Rotten Tomatoes comments that people said. And if you go back through, basically what I concluded was it was something like 75% of the people who left comments, critics, basically said that they didn't understand it. And I thought that was interesting in this respect. Nolan himself even says that you need to watch his movies twice.
Oh, yeah.
That you can't and won't be able to get and take away what you're supposed to just from one watch. Because if you watch it, just like what you're saying, if you watch any movie, the first time around is like, okay, that was great. Whether there were some questions or whether it was a little bit more straightforward. It's the second time when you know what's going to happen that you can start looking for some of these ancillary things, whether it's a plot issue, whether it's some type of other trope or convention of the genre that you're talking about. So I think that that's really unique and interesting that you say that, and that you're actually aspiring to do that, because what I argue in my paper is I think that we're just getting away from the majority of people wanting those kinds of movies.
Oh yeah.
And that a lot of the big films that we're seeing now, unfortunately, are a bit more superficial than complex. And I don't think that that's a good thing for the film industry.
Oh, absolutely not. I talk with my friends a lot about this, and we kind of rave at the fact that it seems like, again, like you said, it's all superficial. Most of the film properties like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, what have you, even like Lord of the Rings or something from recently, they all seem to be more of like cash grab, and they are very, very surface level. The stories don't go deep. You can tell there's no love in them. There's no charm. And it's really sad to see all of those go downhill like that.
I will say that one of the sort of counterpoints to my argument was that a lot of shows on TV are getting made that are highlighting some of these auteur directors, because there's just not enough Scorseses or Tarantinos or Nolans that are going to be able to put out films on their own that are a Christopher Nolan or Quentin Tarantino or Martin Scorsese film. So there, like I said, there's so few of those people. So I guess where we are some of these people are being able to sort of spread their wings is on streaming television, which I guess on one hand, is a little disappointing that the cinema itself is really, kind of a thing of the past, except for these big budget blockbusters, which is really kind of sad if you think about it. But, I don't know if obviously COVID had an impact. I don't know to what extent it's going to ever come back, or I can't predict the future, but it's a sad state of affairs that we don't have more opportunity to see some of these really astounding and influential and momentous films anymore. It's just, and no disrespect to the Fast and the Furious franchise or even the new Indiana Jones, like, I saw these movies, they're great for what they are.
Right.
But am I going to think that this is the greatest movie I've ever seen in my life? Or am I even going to give it 2 seconds worth of thought after I walk out of the theater? No.
Probably not, yeah.
And that's not what film is to me, or you for that matter.
Right. It's an art. It's an art for sure.
And again, I don't want to take anything away. Like, there is an art form to doing and making these blockbusters and these, you may mention grandeur before. I get all of that. But what about narrative? What about character development?
Exactly.
I mean, come on. Like, I don't know. I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. Well, we have, just a few more minutes here. So I want to really get into what you're going to be screening here. First of all, you are going to be screening 2 films. One film is called At War With Myself. The second is Vintage. Now, Vintage is your film.
Yes.
You wrote, produced, and directed. So we'll get to that in just a minute. At War With Myself was from a gentleman named Dominic Mangle, who directed the film, and you were the director of photography. So let's talk a little bit about the differences between these 2 movies in terms of what your role was for someone who might not be familiar with some of the nuance.
Absolutely. So I was the director of photography for both films. For Dominic's At War With Myself, he wrote this story as something that came to him as a story, but also as a way to display his acting potential, because that's like his thing. Is he loves being an actor, and he does really well with that. And he was able to play several parts in this film just based on the synopsis, which I'll give a little brief snippet of, is basically that there's a man who has multiple personality disorder, and his friends are trying to help him through that. But he's able to play, I think, 6 parts from that, and 6 different personalities, which is really fantastic. If you've ever seen the movie Split by M. Night Shyamalan, it's something similar to that. I haven't seen that movie yet. It's on my list, but he watched it and was kind of influenced by that in a way. And he threw his own spin on there of a good message at the end. And that's kind of our thing that we like to do, is sprinkle in good messages and moral excellence in our films while also entertaining people. My position in that was to take his vision and take his story that he wrote and make it kind of creepy, because it's a soft horror movie. That was something that I really enjoyed doing through the camera, because you're looking through that lens then and saying, how can I make this on edge while also telling a story?
So essentially, the director of photography here, you were in charge of setting up the shots, and you were,
Yes.
but you, in terms of creative, like you had nothing to do with the script or necessarily the plot or anything like that, other than maybe just some informal conversations.
Right, yeah. He did confide in me and a couple of the other actors and saying, like, hey, does this make sense? And we would tinker things with him, but he was the one that wrote it for the most part, yes.
But you still had a lot of, I don't want to say, but you still had a lot of influence on what the final product looked like, because you shot it, and it was sort of through your lens, of course, actual camera lens, but it was through your lens and through your knowledge that you were able to do that. And here's what's interesting. So we've talked about this before, but you and I, we got to work together on the West Shore Connect project alongside several other people. I've got to watch another video you did for wedding videos, and it had a very similar feel.
Yes.
And I want to talk about, okay, so even in terms of just a director of photography, how can you shoot a movie different from somebody else? And how do you have your own style just in terms of how you shoot these films?
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I think about it quite a bit, especially for something as aesthetic as like a wedding video or the West Shore Connect program video that we made. It's, to me, filmmaking, like I said, is an art. So in art, you're basically painting a picture, or you're drawing or sketching a photo or something like that. For someone like me, who it's all about how you, I guess, view life and how you view certain things in reality, and the way that you would frame them if you were looking at them. And so if you look at, say, something as simple as a tree, well, how are you going to frame that in your mind for other people to see? How would you look at that in your life? And that's kind of how I think about it. It's really an interesting concept, though, because anyone can have their own viewpoint, which is why you have auteur directors.
And if you think about it too, just like an artist, if an artist has their own style,
exactly,
they can. It's almost like people can see something and say that is artist X, And if somebody else does something sort of in that range, they're saying, oh, that has some type of influence from Artist X. So I think that's super interesting. So we're definitely looking forward to checking out At War with Myself. But the one that I'm so looking forward to seeing is Vintage. So not only, Dylan, was this written and directed and produced and shot by you, it was also partially, at least partially, shot here on the campus of Central Penn College.
It was.
Which I think is also so interesting. So tell us just a little bit more about this film and maybe where you got the inspiration to come up with the story.
Right. So this film is a noir thriller. It is
One of my favorite kinds.
Yes, it's a kind of a mystery as well. But I can't really tell much of the synopsis without giving like everything away because it kind of builds up throughout the film. So the best synopsis I can give is that there is a man who is a writer, and everything in his life seems to be going ordinarily well. He's always happy and stuff, but everything isn't as it appears.
Hey, that sounds good. I love that. I just love the creativity here that you have. So, all right. So first of all, I know that the entire film's in black and white.
Right.
Tell me about that artistic decision, because I got to be honest, it's pretty rare that you see a fully black and white film in today's day and age. Maybe what are the benefits of doing it in black and white other than just the tone that you're trying to set?
Right. So in terms of tone, I mean, noir films I always really like because black and white, I've heard people say, is almost better sometimes than color just because of the way that shadow plays, light plays. You can see things in a whole new way. In terms of a personal decision to make it that way, I am huge into history, as I've said on this podcast many times before. And that aside, I'm also an old soul. So this film kind of drew from a personal part of myself. The messages therein and the style is all stuff that I've drawn from my own personal mind, my view on life, etc. And being able to put that into a film, this probably is currently anyway, my masterpiece, just because of how much I put into the story, rewrites. I was the director of photography again, so I framed things in a certain way. And another really cool thing is the actor for this film. We never used him officially before. We were going to in a film that actually got canceled because things just didn't work out. We were too overzealous. But this actor embodied the perfect character that I was looking for, the quirkiness, the old soul within him. And he's actually a friend of Dominic's, and I met him. I heard him do some of the lines in like a line screening, and I told Dominic, if we can't get Logan, the main actor, to do this part, then I'm not doing this film. I was like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. So being able to draw off of that for this black and white film and put that into that feel of like an old movie, which is what we were going for from like the 20s to the 40s era, is what I was looking for.
So you actually got to screen this out. This CPC Film Series is not the maiden voyage of screening.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about what you did when you actually got to screen this movie, how you went about securing that, and so lay it on us, because this is what I think is super unique about all of this, is not only, yes, you made a movie, but you had a premiere. You got to welcome friends and family to this, to the movie theater to see this on the big screen. I mean, I can only imagine how that must have felt.
It was a fantastic experience and really fun to see everyone come together for that. We had a good turnout. It was this TVP Colonnade in Millersburg, small, little, local, really homey theater. The way that I was able to secure that was that my dad knows a friend who they've been friends since they were kids. And he was able to, through his connections, get me into this theater and said, if you ever need to show a film in here, just let me know. I can get you in for free, because I also had helped the TVP Colonnade with filming their plays there. So I've kind of connected with them. Really, the way that it works for anyone out there that's thinking about ever trying something like this and like, how do I spread it? Because I'm still working on that. It's still kind of tough sometimes, is you have to like reach out to people that you think might know somebody or that you might know, form connections, get networking. It's literally the best way that you can do that.
Here's what's really interesting, and I wonder if, and this is, I don't want to, we have a few minutes left, but I want to just put this out there. I wonder if the pandemic actually, in this respect, might have helped independent filmmakers like yourself. Now, you can, on almost every theater, have private group showings. And even when I was on Midtown Cinema's website, you can also book rooms at the cinema for whatever movie you want to screen. So I don't think that it's going to be as difficult as it probably would have been pre-pandemic to get your stuff screened, whether it's in Millersburg or Harrisburg or even here on the campus of Central Penn College. I think as an independent filmmaker, you could go around to, again, it depends how big you want to have your footprint here, but I think you could go around to a wide variety of places, especially if you have a large network of interested people who are, that live in the area. I think, maybe the next thing is you were talking about potentially turning it into some film festivals, things like that. Hey, why not? Let's reach out to the Midtown Cinema and see if we can get something going on there, because that's the type of people who would be most interested in something like this, especially because you're from Harrisburg.
Absolutely.
So even if you had to rent out your own room, you could maybe even, make a little bit of money off of it. I don't know.
That's true.
But so that was the last thing I wanted to ask you, and I know I kind of already spoiled it, if you will. So the next thing that you're really thinking about is entering Vintage and potentially at War with Myself into some film festivals, whether locally, regionally, or maybe even larger, statewide or national. So tell me a little bit about the festival circuit. Like, what do you know about it, and maybe what are the next steps for this film?
I almost know nothing. So the big step that's next is that I met with a local girl who's actually a composer. And she is really interested and excited to work with our Fellowship Studios team in rescoring Vintage, as I had reached out to her about, so that we can enter it into film festivals. Because right now we're using old music that is still technically copyrighted. The copyright laws are really strange in that way, but we wouldn't be able to enter it into film festivals just because it's not original music. But that's the next big step that I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out. But once that's done, I'd probably start doing some research into what film festivals are more local and are pretty popular in terms of getting people in. As of now, it's pretty tough to find stuff in Central Pennsylvania.
Well, I just shared with you the, I believe, Motivate Film Festival that's hopefully
right.
be coming out next year. So maybe that's something you could work on. But I'm telling you, once you get this thing rescored, I say we take a look at trying to book a room down at Midtown Cinema and see if we can get some people to come out to that, because I think that would be something really, really interesting and cool. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for your time here today. I want everyone to write down on their calendars Friday, July 28th at 6 p.m. Dylan will be, doors open at 6. Dylan will be giving his presentation at 6:30, and then we will screen the films back-to-back at 7 o'clock. And then, of course, after the show, I'm sure you'll be happy to stay around and answer any questions for some aspiring filmmakers. Dylan, I can't thank you enough. I'm so honored that you're able to do this, and how you've been able to stay involved with the college here, whether it's through athletics or even just doing stuff like this. It means so much to us, and I'm proud to be able to feature the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. That means a lot, and I'm glad to be able to be welcomed back with open arms and being able to be involved in all these projects. It's really a great time.
You will always be welcome back. Don't you worry about that. Well, again, please keep July 28th on the calendar so we can come out and check out At War with Myself and Vintage from Dylan Bowman. So, Dylan, thank you again so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the film series.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Professor Miller.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. I'd like to thank the upcoming CPC Film Series presenter, Dylan Bowman. But otherwise, we will see you again next time. So for Professor Paul Miller, until next time on the Nightly News Podcast.
Hi, I'm Shauna.
And I'm Denise.
And I'm Adrienne from the Pirate Life Podcast. And you're listening to the Nightly News Podcast.
Arr!
Welcome, everybody, to the Nightly News Podcast. This is Professor Paul Miller, and I am here with my favorite guest, everyone's favorite guest, the former VP of Student Engagement, Adrienne Thoman. Adrienne, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I always love that warm welcome.
Well, so obviously, and this is no secret to anybody at this point, but Adrienne has officially completed her time here at Central Penn College. Obviously, she has been gone for quite some time by the time that where this is airing, but I wanted to have her on one final time just to kind of talk a little bit more about some of her memories, not only with just the podcast, but talk about her own podcast and talk about, what the future holds for her, and also a super, super big announcement, the completion of her doctorate program. Yes. So that's the things that we're going to talk about today. Well, first of all, Adrienne, you have the honor, I suppose you would say, of appearing on the Nightly News podcast more than anybody else.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, this will be episode 173. Okay, so of 173 episodes that we have done, how many times do you think that you have been on this podcast?
Well, I would say 25.
You know, you're not even close.
What?
Yeah, you're not even close.
Because I was trying to think, there was a while that I was there once a month for like a year or so, right?
Well, so we had you on for an extended period once a month, and then sort of over, basically maybe post-COVID, we've kind of just had you on more than once a term.
Yeah.
But you have been on 54 times.
Oh, wow.
54 times, almost a third. And this goes all the way back to, okay, so here's the second question. When do you believe the first time, and I better move it just so you can't see, when do you believe the first time you were on this podcast?
It was definitely before COVID, because we talked about COVID. And it would have been, I mean, we were back in the old studio. Was
for
that
sure.
like 2018?
So I think that you're forgetting that before we were here and at the Boyer House, we were here. And you were actually on several of the very early episodes, all of which are on our YouTube page, by the way. You can always just check out the Nightly News Media Club at Central Penn College if you want to go back and relive some of these old episodes, which actually might be interesting. Maybe down the line, we'll sort of re-listen to one of those old episodes and sort of critique. You know, the first time that you were on this podcast was May 3rd, 2016.
Oh, wow. That was way back.
Our first episode was February 9th, 2016. We did one February 29th and then April 18th, and you were on episode number 4. Came back
That's soon. Episode number 4.
Episode 4, and then you were also on episodes 6 and 7, as well as 10, 12, and 15.
Oh my gosh. Now I want to go back and look at some of these and listen.
They're all still there. Plenty of good listening opportunities for you here. So, Adrienne, you have appeared on 54 episodes, and you have been coming on since May 3rd of 2016 for 7+ years. You have been a major have of the Nightly News podcast. Not only just, you know, there's a lot of different reasons why I've had you on. Obviously, because you have always been, since I have known you, at least since you started coming on the show, you've been in charge of the activities in one fashion or another. So it was important for us to come on, for you to come on and talk about some of the big activities that you had coming on, try to promote what you had going on, and trying to promote some engagement. But there's also kind of another reason that I've brought you on, and that is because of your history in broadcast. I know that we've mentioned this a few times on this show, but you used to be intern for Marconi Award-winning broadcaster Bruce Bond.
Oh, that was way back in the day.
Yeah, but
there's some dust and some cobwebs for those memories.
You know, it's something that I've always been envious of, and I remember, and I've since we'll get to this in a minute, but I've since talked to Bruce about this. So
does he remember me?
That I couldn't say. I could certainly
okay.
put you in touch with him and see if he remembers you, but no. So when I was in high school, even from a fairly young age, I'd say probably from like 14 or 15, I listened to his show every single day. I remember when I was 14 years old and I used to deliver my newspapers. I had my Walkman, and I would listen to him in my headphones while I was delivering newspapers at 14 years old. And interestingly enough, as I went to college, I initially thought I was going to go for computer science. And as soon as I
can't even imagine that.
Much like a lot of people, you find your calling, or maybe you find what isn't your calling, and then you find your calling, which is what happened to me. My first couple of semesters, I didn't like the classes I was taking and realized that, hey, I can change my major. And of course, I'd already been working at the radio station, because that was one of the things from day one that I got on board at the radio station at Slippery Rock. And it was because of Bruce Bond. But what was interesting was, I was just kind of doing that for fun, and then I'm like, this is something that I think I'm pretty good at. Of course, I wasn't at the time in comparison to what I am now, but the point is, I think all along we kind of had that bond. Like when you first told me, no pun intended, when you first told me about interning with Bruce, I was like, I guarantee that I heard you because you said that you were on the air on occasion. I mean, I literally listened to his show religiously, so much so that when I went to school, I actually had somebody record his shows on
You did
tape,
not.
and I
So you
still
wouldn't miss it?
I still have them.
Oh my
I still have
gosh.
these old shows. Anyway, why I said about it coming full circle was I actually got to know Bruce very well. When he came back to the area, he was on 93.5 on Saturday mornings, and it was a situation where, you can certainly look it up. I'm not going to drag him through the mud any more than he already has been, but he got himself into some legal trouble and was off the air for quite some time. And he came back to the air because he had some sponsors. And so on the weekends at 93.5 at the time, they basically you could purchase airtime. So he purchased airtime, and then he got money from his sponsors. Well, some of the businesses I was representing at the time, we paid for on-air time slots for some of the events that we were doing. So we got to know him. I went into the studio 3 or 4 times with some of my clients, and it was really great. We got a ton of publicity. Well, then the station changed formats, and he was again left without a show. Well, he calls me up the one day and he says, how would you like to produce my show? And you're talking about somebody who 20 years earlier was just so mesmerized by this person. So much so that I would say that he's probably the reason that I do what I do today.
That's incredible.
And I actually got to produce.
What a moment to get that call.
Yeah, I got to produce his podcast. We did it from here at Central Penn, and of course I got permission and all of that. But it was so interesting to get to produce his essentially final shows, and he's no longer on the air anymore, and he doesn't still produce audio content anymore, but I can honestly say that I got to produce his final probably 12 to 24 shows that he ever did. So when I say about coming full circle, like that to me is what it is, because you had that opportunity to work with him such a long time ago, and then I got to work with him down the road. But that was why I wanted to have you on, because almost every show we're having people on who've never done a podcast before. And not to say that that's a problem. I enjoy it. It's fun. But it's also good to have people that know what they're doing. and you always have, and you've always been fun.
No, I have not always have. It was definitely a learning process. I remember some of those first episodes, and there was definitely growth that happened. So.
Well, even for me, it'd been a long time since I had done a show like this, many, many years, really since I'd been back at college. And so even for me, some of the early episodes that we did, number one, we didn't have the appropriate equipment, but we were able to battle through, and now we do some wonderful things here with the Nightly News podcast, and I'm so glad that you're a part of it. 54 times, Adrienne.
Mm-hmm.
I think unless something crazy happens, I'm pretty sure you got the record forever. I mean, you know what I mean?
You better let me know if somebody beats me.
Well, if that's the case, we'll definitely have you back on. But I just want you to know, like, when we think about the Nightly News, and when we think about all of the history that the club is continuing to create, and the number of podcast episodes and things like that, it simply couldn't be without you. You were such a key part of everything that we do. Like, I knew that I could always put you in for that first episode of the term to help promote what you're doing. But that's good for me too, because I've got a lot of time I have to fill, and I'm not really sure who's going to help me fill it without this void with you moving on. So, but again, I don't want to belabor that. I thought it was interesting that you would like to know that you have been a regular contributor to the Nightly News podcast to the tune of 54 times since May 3rd of 2016.
I love that. And I just have to say, I think it's amazing that we have this here. It's huge that our students are able to have this platform to be able to practice and learn and experience. I remember being a student, and the things that you do hands-on, our students going to remember being in this podcast studio or calling the games or whatever it may be, but they're going to remember their work that they're doing through the Nightly News. So kudos to you, to all the club members, and to everything that's happening here. I think it's a real asset for our students.
So another one of the things that I did want to talk about, since we talked about me a little bit, is something you've been working on for a very long period of time is your doctorate program. So if you don't mind sharing, tell us a little bit more about the final dissertation work that you did and what your study was about and what you ultimately found out in the end.
So I'll say it this way. It actually was inspired in a classroom here. I taught one term, and during that term, there was just a lot of student absenteeism.
Were you
and
teaching for me?
I was.
Was that Com 100 or Com 101? Do you remember?
I think it was oral. It was human comm.
Okay.
And lots of kind of absenteeism, missed assignments, and I was really struggling to figure out what was going on with the students and how I could support them. And it was just this little nugget of a thought of what is it that helps a student that might be struggling to persist in their class? I didn't even have a name for it. Like, I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know what I was seeing or what was causing it. And I ended up, when I started my my doctoral program, I had some really meaningful guided studies with some faculty there. And I learned about the idea of trauma and trauma-informed care and how it affects students and how our population here at Central Penn includes a number of populations that are at higher risk of trauma. So really learning about that was the whole foundation of my study, with our students totally at the heart of it. Like, I wanted my time and my research to be invested in them and for them. So we did a study to see about trauma-informed care and how prevalent it was here at Central Penn. We definitely saw signs of it, but lots of room for growth. There was a framework that we used by Dr. Berkey and her team, and that was the guide point for it. And we tried to match the responses to that framework. And I think we have a really good baseline now for where to start. And I had the opportunity to present it to President Fedrizzi, and Steve Hassinger was also in the room, and our Vice President Romeo, and share that with them. And I'm actually hopeful that it's something that is incorporated that could be part of our strategic plan someday.
Well, and I think that you mentioned that, and I think it's fair to say that we do deal with a variety of individuals who might be exposed to trauma. You were the expert here, not me, but just anecdotally, even with the things that have happened here on campus with the loss of one of our baseball players, Angel Mercado, just even something like that, the immense ripple effects that it has, it's really quite astounding. And I give many of these folks so much credit for being able to persist, to your point. But it's not just simply that. There's a lot of other things that might be going on in students all across universities and colleges across the U.S., but certainly we are not exempt to that.
Right. And when you think of something like COVID-19, which is a global pandemic, you could almost argue that trauma is something experienced universally. And the importance of trauma-informed care and adapting our processes and policies to make sure they're not causing additional trauma, that they are supportive so students are able to persist, I think is so important.
Well, Adrienne, I think it goes without saying that we are certainly going to miss you. And I just want you to know that no matter what happens, at least I know that you did not take this decision lightly, and that you are forever going to be associated with this institution, not only because you've been such a major asset of it. In fact, you've been here for
11 years.
11 years, yeah, because you were here before me, and I have been here since 2013. So when you think about how long you were here and the relationships that you've made over the years, like, it's really quite incredible. And your impact here is going to be felt forever. I mean, there's no one that's able to replace you, and I don't think anybody is even going to be put in that position, because it's just not possible. What you've managed to do over the last 11 years is really quite exemplary. So really what I just want to kind of have you do here before we call it a day here on hopefully not your final podcast ever with the Nightly News, but maybe for a little while.
Well, till somebody comes at my title, then I'm coming back.
As you think back to your experience here, what are some of the things that you're always going to remember in terms of whether it's just professionally or relationships that you've created? What are some of the things here that you're going to leave, and what do you think your legacy is?
Oh my goodness. I will remember our students. There are so many memories, both little and big, just of interactions with them, or funny things that they did, or just cool things that they were a part of, conferences that we went to, things that we laughed about, seeing them engage with each other. It truly is the best job ever. Like, watching and working with our students is the best job ever.
What are you going to think down the road as some of the things that you helped? And again, you're always so positive and collaborative, and there's so many adjectives I could use here. But when you think back to over the last 11 years of your career, what are some of the things that you're going to remember that you did? Like actually things that you put into place or policies that ended up being super beneficial? Like, as you think back, what are some of those things that resonate with you and will in the future?
So some of the things that I think I'm most proud of, I was a founding member of our diversity committee.
Oh,
Yeah, that it started way back in the day with me and a couple other people that actually are no longer aren't with the college anymore. But I love that I was one of the OGs and helped to make that founding member of our sustainability committee and green team. Megan Peterson and I developed the women's leadership retreat. And I remember the first year we did it, I don't know what we were thinking, but we're like, yes, we'll do it. And we'll do all the presentations and all the trainings. I don't know what we were thinking, but every year the event just developed into what it was. And every year was so unique and so different. And that's definitely something that I'm proud of. And have gotten feedback from students that was something that really meant something to them, that they were able to impact their life in some way. So that's definitely something that I will carry with me.
and this is the final question that I have for you. And I hope that it's one that you have a good answer for.
Uh-oh. Now the pressure's on.
No, this is not a pressure-filled question. I'm not going to do you like that. How in the world do you manage to stay so positive all of the time, even in the face of a demanding job and a doctoral program?
Oh, I'm blessed. What can I say? You know, every day if you're having a bad day, that's the day that a student does something that's like, they're going to come in and tell you a joke or make a special point to come in and see you, or maybe even they're struggling and they come to you to work through whatever that they may be going through. Like, that to me makes it all.
Because I've never once, ever, I cannot ever remember a time that I even saw you even a little bit upset. Honestly, and I'm sure maybe you have, but you did so well kind of hiding it. Like,
Lots of Dunkin'. You got to have lots of Dunkin'.
I mean, I try my best to always maintain the most positive attitude as possible, but sometimes, and as somebody who's also been, trying to finish up their doctoral program myself, obviously you beat me to the punch. Again, how, I have no idea, but it can be difficult to keep that positive attitude all the time. And again, I try my very best to constantly think about the things that I do well, and constantly try to think about positivity. And frankly, you're to thank for some of that for me. And again, I know I still have a long way to go until I can get to the point where I'm constantly a positive person. But I got to tell you that a lot of the positive changes I've made in my life are because of you. Because if you can do it, I can too. And like, you're finishing your doctoral program through all of this is even so much more of an inspiration to me, because over the past few months, I have really struggled with being motivated. Not even so much just simply motivation, but we all have much going on. And lately it's just been like, I've been prioritizing other things.
Yeah.
And you finally pushing through, finishing this up, it's gotten me motivated, and I've been writing every single day since then, because I know that I need to finish this because I need to make you proud of me.
Well, I already am, and you've got this. You're going to be fine. And I do want to keep it real for a minute, because I think it's important to also acknowledge that I am not positive all the time.
I've never seen you not be positive.
But you find things that are going to work for you when you're in those moments, right? So, you know your coworker that you can go to. You walk in the office and you're like, I need 2 minutes. And you get it out, and then you just keep going on with your day. You find ways, or you find that friend that you can, my podcast, My Pirates, right? We have had the most long-standing Facebook thread in Facebook Messenger. It's been going on since we started our friendship. And it's good, bad, ugly, all the things. And having outlets like that help. So know your outlets and take advantage of them.
Well, we're about to sign off for Adrienne's 55th appearance here on the Nightly News Podcast. But honestly, I know that when you actually listen to this, it'll certainly be bittersweet because you'll have moved on from Central Penn. But I had to have you on one last time to just kind
I'm
of
glad you
take
did.
a look back at the last at least 7 years with the Nightly News. But certainly we've known each other since I've been here in 2013. And to be honest, one of them, not only just my favorite colleagues, but my favorite people in the entire world.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, before we get out of here, why don't you just give a quick shout out about your Pirate Life podcast in case you want to keep up with what Adrienne's doing after this podcast signs off.
Please do come check us out, thepiratelifepodcast.com. We have links there. We're also available on all major podcast platforms. We're all about pirates, but we're not about pirates. We talk about travel and friendship and fun and health and wellness and just all the things. So come and listen with us and share with us. We'll happy to have you in our audience.
Sounds like a plan. Well, Adrienne, I'm sorry that this may be the last time for a little while, but it's always a pleasure to have you on, and that certainly won't be the last we hear from you.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Nightly News Podcast. Special thanks go out to Adrienne Thoman for joining us for episode number 55 on her resume. We'll see you again next time on the Nightly News Podcast.